That life you always wanted, but you didn't know. 'Cause you didn't know.
Hello and welcome to the Kalamazoo Church of Christ podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We're a startup church we just planted in September 2020. And at the Kalamazoo Church, we believe that Christianity is done best when it is done together. And so if you live in the Kalamazoo area, we would love to connect. Be it coming to a Sunday service, one of our small groups, or even just grabbing coffee with a member to learn more. You can visit kalamazoo.church in order to do that. We pray that you are inspired by what you hear today. So I want to start by just saying right off the bat that it's been a really good day, or rather good week in football. I don't know where you guys stand as far. I've got some people that totally disagree, but so on one hand, the Western Michigan Broncos had a come from behind victory that was super cool. There was a fake play that happened right at the end of it to win, and there was a player that was wide open, and it was incredible. So that's one. The other thing that happened is actually the Badgers beat the Michigan Wolverines, and so however you fall, that's some people are excited and others definitely less so. But now that I've lost all of you, we're gonna get into our lesson. You can go to 1 Samuel 17. So what we're doing over this next few weeks, we're going to enter into a series that's called 3 P's in a Pod. Talking about problems, possessions, and people. Okay, and so as you guys really think about the issues that are going on right now, just in your life, I would put before you that virtually all of them have some component of just a problem being something from the outside that you can't really control. It could be a health issue. It could be financially related. It could be just the overall stress of the view of where society is at right now in America, but then the global climate as well. Or possessions, something that this attempt to get money or to give, or you think about all of the Thanksgiving and Christmas time, a lot of it is this call towards spending money and then giving some, and the presents that, man, we just wish we had a little bit more money to do that. Or maybe you're in a house right now that you're like, I don't love it, I want to get to a bigger place, and all of that stuff. But possessions is another big issue. And then the last thing, obviously, I don't have to go super deep into it, is people. And we understand that people comprise so many of the issues that we deal with on a frequent basis, and so much really relationships that we can control, then some that we cannot as well. Today, though, I really want to look at the first P, and that's problems. I'd put before us that this lesson, but this series is actually pretty pertinent to the time that we're entering into, this holiday season, where there's just things are a little bit heightened, right? Maybe you're gonna go through this finals period, and there's a bunch of uncertainty. Or maybe, again, you're trying to get some money, or you're just even looking forward and knowing that you're going to have to interact with people and your family. And we love family, but it can be a difficult time to interact at different points. I don't know about you guys, but maybe there's family members that you say, well, they have an expiring date that once, after about 24 hours is when they start to turn sour. And then I need to wait a couple months, and then I'll go back for another 24 hours. Or maybe you love your family and that you can't relate, and amen to that. That is awesome too. But over these next 3 weeks, we're going to look into the life of David, and it's not going to be chronological necessarily. It's going to be topical, but we're going to look specifically at how he interacted with these 3 issues, and hope that we can gain some conviction for ourselves. Amen. So we're over here. We're in 1 Samuel 17. We're talking about problems, and we're going to look at David and Goliath. My prayer is that we've heard this story so many times. If you've been to church for any length of time, I'm sure every year there's the annual David and Goliath sermon. If you have a guest speaker, maybe there's the twice a year David and Goliath sermon. It just shows up somehow, or maybe you can think, well, the preacher didn't know what to talk about, so he just decided to talk about David and Goliath today, and because we all know it. I hope to add a little bit of insight into it this morning, and leaving today. My prayer is a couple of things, that as we look at the problems that are outside of our control, my prayer is that we view it from a spiritual perspective. And my prayer is that we are able to make a cheat code, basically. So we view it from a spiritual perspective, and we look for a way out. And I'll explain, it'll come to a close here, and I'll explain it in a bit. But we're in 1 Samuel 17. We're going to pick up, just for a little bit of context, in verse 4. It says, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come to me. If he is able to fight me and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistines said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Okay, pause here. And then, actually, you can go down to verse 16. It says, for 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. Okay, pause. So we've got this story, and it starts out, and Philistines were they were opposing God. And you read in the Old Testament, I don't know if you guys have ever wondered why there's so much bloodshed and why it talks about killing with such normalcy. And really, there's a couple of big reasons. The one, maybe easy one, is that's how societies interacted with each other. They killed each other and overtook land. The second thing is understanding that really the Israelites in the Old Testament is a story about how God's people were trying to live like God in the midst of times that were pretty difficult to live like God, and the time when all these outside nations were not living like God, and this group was God's chosen people in an effort to spread the good news. That was a very difficult thing to do if you were going to be killed. And so much of the stories in the Bible that we hear about killing is in response to self-defense a lot of times, and really to promote God's overall plan in the grand scheme of things. So just understand that. We're talking about killing, but it's not appropriate, obviously, to do that same kind of thing right now. But we see, though, that a couple of things. One, Goliath, it says, is like 9 feet tall and 9 inches. And that's extremely tall. There's other texts that we found that say he might have been about 7 feet, give or take, which is still very tall, right? And so you understand there's this giant guy, and he's yelling at God's people, hey, come down. And the type of battle he was talking about would have been on both sides in an effort to not have this massive amount of bloodshed. It was pretty commonplace in that day to have this duel of sorts, where the best warrior on one side would go forward, and the best warrior on the other side would go forward, and then whoever won that, exactly how Goliath says, this side would become subject to that side or whatever. But it was just the death of one person. Okay, so this is really commonplace in that day, and he's yelling this for 40 days. And you think about being God's people in that time, totally terrified, because we cannot stand before this guy and have any hope of victory at all. You think about this for sure was a problem. And it was a problem that was really outside of the control of just one individual, or at least seemingly outside of the control of just one individual. It was difficult because not only was it's one of those problems that you hear it every day, and then surely you can read, we're not going to read the whole chapter, but you can read that there's inside of this camp, there are people and they're kind of talking, like, man, we cannot do this. There's no hope. And so often these problems that this Goliath was a problem, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more we talk about it, the less we actually act on it. Isn't it true? Now drop down to verse 22. Okay, so now where does David fit into all this? Well, David he wasn't even allowed to go on the battlefield. And his dad asked him, hey, you got to come and really give this food to your brothers. Make sure they're doing okay. Send back a report. Let me know if they're okay or not. So David goes and does that, and he starts to overhear some things here. It's in verse 22. So he left his flock, and he loaded up, and he followed what his dad said. Said, David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine, champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. And so pause here. This defiance has been already for 40 days, and now David hears it for the first time. These people have been hearing this for a long time. David hears it for the first time, and his ears are peaked. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asked the man standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Now, pause here. The first point that we're going to talk about is when we're dealing with problems that are out, again, these are problems outside of our control or seemingly outside of our control. Again, big, massive issues in the world that by ourselves we have very little power over. And also, there's day-to-day problems. You think about the health issues that so many are going through and we can't really control it. You think about the idea of death and either expected or unexpected death from those closest to us, and so much of it you can't really control. These are the problems we're talking about. My first point is to make it spiritual. So you read here, these Israelites had been hearing this speech for a series of days, and they said this guy is defying Israel. And certainly that's true. And it's also, there's shades of spirituality, Israel being God's special people. But this is what David says, though. It says that he's defying the armies of the living God. So it's a flip. Certainly the same words, but so often our words have power over our thoughts, don't they? That David is like, no, this guy is defying God himself. He's defying God in certain, yes, Israelites, of course, but who is he that he's going to defy God? You think about the 7-foot tall guy. David would have been an average person at the time would probably be about 5'5". David was a young boy, and he was a little bit shorter. Maybe he was even 5 feet tall. So you have this 2-foot difference, and certainly an amount of strength difference. And every day, this Goliath, I imagine him getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you have David coming in. He's like, who is this guy? And there's this energy that you feel inside of him, not from his own self, but he knows what he's been taught growing up, that, man, this guy's defying God. I cannot let him do that. Let's keep reading here in verse 32. So we're dropped down now, and David is he's honestly, he's disgusted is the word that I get, and his brothers are saying you're so conceited, actually. So his brothers, David's viewing it spiritually. His brothers are saying, no, you just want the glory for yourself, and it's very foolish because you are going to lose. David says in verse 32, so he says to Saul, the king, the one who has kind of control, at least physical control over these guys, it says, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. If we're going to be those people who are able to view things spiritually, the first thing we got to do is actually get the focus off of ourselves. David says, let no one lose heart. David didn't lose heart. He could see this problem and say, it's not a big deal. We're going to deal with it. It's going to happen. No, he looks and he says, no, these guys are losing heart. Let nobody lose heart. And so these problems, certainly they're big. Maybe in your life, they're huge right now. And if not, you're going through a season of awesome times, then amen. Just know that there's going to be a time when there's problems that hit you that you have very little control over. And so often our response is internally to think about how bad we have it. And yet the response of David, the response of spiritual men and women is, let me look at what's going on the outside. Or let me look at what's going on outside of myself, rather. Let's keep reading. It says, Saul replied, you're not able to go out against the Philistines and fight him. You're only a young man. And he has been a warrior from his youth. This is what David says. He says, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. Pointing to God again, isn't he? The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, go and the Lord be with you. So as I imagine it, Saul is blown away perhaps by this speech. But I wonder, even if in his head he's like, yeah, this guy, the worst that happens is he gets knocked out, right? Like and we can say, no, that didn't count. You know, that we didn't know, he was too young. He just went and fought, and let's get somebody real next time. And he's like, man, we don't got an awful lot to lose at this point. The worst thing that happens is something good or something bad, but really bad stuff is already going on. And so we've got this, and David is, again, he does a couple of things really well that if we are going to look at problems and make them spiritual, we have to do. One, he's pointing to God the whole time, isn't he? And he's pointing to the glory of God as well. And then the second thing that he's doing is he's viewing other people and he's considering them. That I wonder if David every day, and I wonder, and I don't know, that he's fighting this, think about this lion and this bear, and he gives God credit for delivering him. He could have said, no, I'm a very skilled throwing a sling. I'm very skilled at that. But instead, he's giving glory entirely to God. No, God rescued me from it. And he's going to do that again. For you and me, as we're going through problems, again, that are totally outside of our control. And again, it's so difficult. I appreciate the lesson last week that Ben was talking, that these problems, it's not like a silo of issues that I have one issue and I deal with it, and then I go to the next issue and I deal with it. They're kind of all interwoven with one another, and it's heavy. And he did say, he brought up a great point that even little issues, they only grow or they add on top, and they end up seeming very big because there are big issues that we're dealing with as well. And all of this stuff, again, I would challenge us. Our brains can move so fast, and so sometimes it's like, man, I don't want to over spiritualize this stuff. And certainly we can't over spiritualize everything. So what I mean is, this was a few years ago. I was interacting with a guy at UW Milwaukee, and he had come out for a series of a few months, and he studied the Bible, and then he kind of walked away. He wasn't super interested in holding to the biblical standard. He said he was, but in actuality, he really wasn't. And I didn't see him for a couple of months. And then I saw him again, and I just looked at him. I was like, man, this guy. And I was like, hey, dude, what happened, man? You've been MIA for like a couple months, dude. You fell off. And he looked at me. He's like, oh, yeah, man, God's putting me through it. I said, okay, what's going on? He said, man, God's putting me through it, man. I'm getting all F's in school, and, I don't know where I'm going to live. And I said, okay, that's really tough stuff. Do you go to class? It's like, no, man, I haven't been to class in weeks. And I'm like, okay, do you have a job? He said, no, man, I got fired. I showed up late too much. I said, okay. And so I'm not talking about those kind of problems, right? That going to class is totally inside of our control. And so that's over-spiritualizing where we don't need to over-spiritualize. The stuff that's inside of our control, right? Showing up to work and showing up on time, that's always going to be in our control for the most part, right? There's times we sleep in or I feel it now being a young parent. I'm like, man, I get why people are late so frequently. Or I feel it. Even this morning, I felt it. So I get it. But understand that stuff's inside of our control. And so to over-spiritualize stuff that we have full control over would be foolish. This, though, is outside of our control that we're giving it entirely to God. This is how to do it. Let's keep reading here in 1 Samuel 17. We're gonna pick up in verse 45 here just for a little bit. So now David's talking to him, talking to Goliath. It says, David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head." That is intense stuff. "This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." And now keep in mind, again, it sounds harsh, but right above it, Goliath says the same thing to David. "I'm going to give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. All those gathered will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." There is such defiance in his speech. It literally says he defied. There's so much in David's speech that he's like, man, I'm going to do this. And God is going to do this. And sure, he's going to use me, but I am done. You think about just a couple of days ago, he was tending his sheep, doing his own thing, and then sees this issue and somehow it's thrust into his face. And the only response is, I don't want these people to continue to lose heart. And God's, of course, going to deliver me. Make a point to spiritualize problems that are outside of your control. Found if we're able to do this effectively, it's not this get rich quick or self-help anything. Actually, it's not a very easy fix at all. But what it does though is if we're able to spiritualize these problems that again are outside of our control, there's a peace that we feel for sure. And then there's the reality that we're going to call out to God a lot more. It's going to be something that is spiritual, and knowing that it's totally outside of our control if someone's going to follow God or not, or it's totally outside of our control if a sick loved one is going to get healthy or not. It's totally, in so many ways, outside of our control on a huge macro level. So many of these issues of poverty and division amongst races and cultures and gender and all of that, there's so much of that is outside of our control if we're just a one-person show. So how do we spiritualize problems? Well, I think considering the impact of more than just you and your immediate circle, be a part of the change, however big or small, right? David, so this sling, it's not like the pulley thing. It'd be basically this leather strap, and then there was a couple of strings or like stuff attached to it, and he would take it, one on his probably thumb or maybe index finger and his pinky, and he would spin it up to 7 times a second. And it was honestly, this was viewed as very deadly. Like there's stuff that'll show that it was about as deadly as just a gun at point blank range, basically. If you were accurate with this stone. Use what's inside of your control, be a part of the change, however big or small, right? And then we just got to make it about God. So first point, spiritualize stuff outside of your control. The next point is don't play by the rules. And this is rules in quotations. I'll explain what I mean here. We're in verse 48. It says, as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bags and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword, drew it from his sheath, and he killed him. He cut off his head with his sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Stop here. So this understood level of combat, again, would have been hand-to-hand. It would have been, it's an infantry combat, basically. There's an interesting little bit that we think, there's this book written a few years ago, I think maybe in 2014 or 13, it's called David and Goliath. And this guy, it's written by Malcolm Gladwell, who's not a Christian necessarily. I think he actually, from writing this book, he grew in his faith a lot, and so maybe he would identify as being a Christian now, I'm not sure. But at least in the moment, he didn't. And the intention of the book was to basically look at some of the greatest underdog stories and try to make sense of them. Why were these underdogs more successful than you'd imagine? And so certainly the greatest underdog story, or one of the greatest underdog stories, is David against Goliath, at least on the surface. What Malcolm Gladwell points out, though, is a few things. The first is that there's this rock, paper, scissors in battle, especially in that ancient day. And there was the infantry, artillery, and cavalry, right? And so infantry is hand-to-hand combat. Artillery is throwing combat, basically like flying object combat, and then cavalry. Cavalry is with horses. And so it was some kind of basically the idea of Goliath. He's saying, hey, we got to fight hand to hand. David's saying, no, I'm not going to fight hand to hand. I'm going to fight with artillery and infantry, or against infantry rather. And this was understood even then, that any artillery combat always beat infantry. And that infantry combat would beat cavalry. They could overpower even these horses. And that, oh man, I forget how it all worked out. But anyways, so one, there we go. The second thing that Malcolm Gladwell points out is that Goliath needs an armor bearer in order to travel, okay? So and he asked the question, why would this strong, powerful warrior need an armor bearer to lead the way? Fair question. So he's just identifying these couple of things. The next thing is that Goliath actually tells David, hey, you come to me. Okay? And then the next thing that he says, hey, who are you that you come at me with sticks? And he uses the plural word. Even in the Hebrew, the word is plural. Who are you that you're coming at me with sticks? The whole point that Malcolm Gladwell was bringing up was it was extremely likely if he was 7 feet, and certainly if he was much taller than 7 feet, it was likely that Goliath had basically his pituitary gland would have been pressed by a tumor, which would mean that he wouldn't be able to see very well. He wouldn't be able to move very well. And really he was a walking target, essentially. And so again, why bring all this stuff up? Again, it's an amazing story, but I mean to say that this huge problem was really, I put before you, not as big as it seemed. It was just that they couldn't play by the rules if they were going to defeat this problem. I think the story of David and Goliath, it says much about God's people seeing issues as too big for God when a person of faith is all that's needed, as it is a great underdog victory story. This idea that essentially David needed an armor bearer even just to lead the way. He wasn't able to Goliath needed an armor bearer. He wasn't able to go to David by himself. The truth for you and I, you can go to Matthew 5. We'll hopefully make sense of it. What is outside of the rules then? How do we play outside of the rules for you and I? Well, I think the reality to all of these problems, and maybe what you're already sitting with, is they're not really ours to solve. They're outside of our control. We can only do a very limited amount if we are going to have success. But this is the stuff that we can do. And this is, I think, the thinking outside of the box, the not playing by the rules, is to not view the solution to these problems as something that is going to occur inside of a person's life. And so what do I mean when I say that? Well, there's this quote. It's by the great coach called Vince Lombardi. It's what he's Here we go. So he's the Green Bay Packers coach. He won many Super Bowls, and actually the trophy, like the football trophy, is named after him. The Super Bowl trophy, they call it the Vince Lombardi Trophy. So he's very well respected, well known. He's a hardline coach, and he has one of the things that he said, though, is they asked him a question. He said, "Well, why did he lose the game?" He said, "We didn't lose the game. We just ran out of time." And so what does that mean? Well, he's saying, we didn't lose. If we had a little bit more time, we would have had the victory. We were down by a bunch, something bad happened, but we just needed more time. It was just a matter of time before we were going to get a victory. I think for you and I, or anybody who's going to call himself a Christian, I think that's going to be true of us, that sometimes it feels like, man, we're losing this battle. There's no hope, or even God is losing this battle. And the reality is, no. For you and I, we just need to view it as a longer span of time, is what I would say. Matthew 5 in verse 13, this is Jesus now speaking. And he understands that there are huge problems, and he understands that he is in control of them, but the people he's speaking to it's outside of their control. It says, "You are the salt of the earth," in verse 13. "But if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You're the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Jesus is setting the stage on how to live life properly, and he's saying a couple of things that you and I need to pull pretty readily. And the reality, though, for you and I, again, stuff that is outside of our control, he's saying, well, you got to control what you can control. Don't fight how the world is fighting. If we are going to be a light, then we can't attack and fight how the world fights. That's just the truth of it. The idea of there being this 80-year gap between me and all of these problems being solved is incredibly foolish. We are playing the long game for all of this. The cheat code is helping as many people to be in a good spot with God for eternity. That is not playing by the rules of the world. That is letting our light shine and having the vision that if my light is going to shine, that's going to be my end goal and what I'm playing for. In John 16, this is as we prepare our hearts for communion, and there'll be a prayer. It says, Jesus again talking to his disciples. This is the Last Supper, right before he's going to go on the cross. He says in verse 33, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Verse 33, "In this world you'll have trouble, take heart, I have overcome the world." There's an understanding that there's stuff that we're not going to be able to solve right here and right now, and we need to be able to give it to God and do an awesome job about stuff outside of our control. Let's make a point this week to make it very spiritual. If you're going through a difficult health situation, I would challenge you that it's outside. I would challenge you, make it very spiritual. If there's a loved one who's in a tough spot, I would challenge you, make your times very spiritual. Pray beforehand, pray afterwards, pray that there's so much of my prayer right now is being spent just praying that radical stuff happens, that I'm realizing I'm totally not in control of so much. You think about all of the mass issues that are going on in this world. Certainly, global pandemic, but we've talked about it. There are divisions that even in the last 10 years, I think have been given new light to, that maybe have been going on for a long time, but there's massive divisions. And if we're going to be the city on a hill, we can't allow those divisions to permeate the church, certainly, but we need to be those who give solutions that are eternal. Amen? Amen. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the Kalamazoo Church of Christ podcast. If you're in the Kalamazoo area, we'd love to get connected. Please go to kalamazoo.church and fill in your information to come to a Sunday service or any other event that we have going on. In any case, you'll be hearing from us next week.
Too busy saving souls.